Welcome to another episode of Quantum Action, the place you come to get the information that you need, the motivation that you need in order to take that quantum action and to take you to infinity and beyond. Today, we are here to talk about part 3 of the Mastermind discussion that we did with TJ and Chris and Ben about the book Think and Grow Rich. Fantastic book. If you haven't read it, I recommend you buy it and read it, digest it, read it again and again and again and apply it because it's great. This is a great discussion we've had. This is part 3. If you haven't listened to part 1 and 2, you can click on the link and find parts 1 and 2 and tune in. And remember to subscribe also to Quantum Action. But that's enough from me, Fabrizio here, your host on Quantum Action Podcast. Let's get into the third part of the Mastermind series about Think and Grow Rich. Off we go. Next point is decision. Interesting on this, it says here, after analysing the data accrued from interviewing more than 25,000 men and women, Napoleon Hill came to the conclusion that a lack of decision, e.g. procrastination, was one of the leading causes of failure. The most successful people make decisions quickly and definitely. Those who struggle to make a decision are often easily persuaded by the opinions of others. So procrastination is what stops people from moving forward, and deciding quickly is what distinguishes the successful from the non-successful. How many times have we been in a situation where we need to make a decision? And during my airline pilot training, you're in this metal aluminium tube at 35,000 feet and something goes wrong and you need to make a decision. You got to make the decision quickly because you've got 180 people sitting behind you and they're relying on you and bringing this airplane down on the ground. You got to make a decision quickly, but it's not something that you just make this decision. You've had all this training and specialized knowledge and desire and everything rolled in, which allows you to then go and make these decisions. But very often, some people think that they need all the information before they can actually make a decision and move forward. But sometimes that faith is all you need to make the first step. I'm sure that when Steve Jobs started Apple, he didn't know everything that he needed to know to create that massive company. He just made the first step. And that requires faith. And as Ben was saying in the beginning, these 13 principles are not, you can't just take one and apply it. You have to apply them all. And they all are tied into each other. But how is decision-making important? Ben, in your business and that, how important, and in your life, how important has it been to make certain decisions and quickly?
Yeah, I think, well, it's essential, isn't it? When I hear the word decision, I think of it, I love etymology. Yeah, and the origins, or the Latin word for decision is decidere, which interestingly enough means to kill or to cut off, which means when we make a decision, we are actually cutting off the alternatives. It's a singular thing, isn't it? We make that decision, we stick with it, we move forward. And I think that is really, really important. And it certainly comes off the back of faith and specialized knowledge in a big way. Yeah, in order to make concrete, solid, confident decisions, there needs to be a basis and a foundation behind it that involves your skill and your knowledge base. It involves faith and desire and commitment to the outcome. And a lot of that does come back to self. I think our ability to make strong decisions is rooted in our ability to trust ourselves and our own judgment. If we've had a habit of making bad choices in the past, and I'll kind of clarify that one, this issue, or expand on it in just a sec. But if we've made a mess of our lives in the past by making bad choices, then our ability to decide concretely, effectively, concisely, and effectively moving forward is going to be really compromised. Yeah. So making good decisions, I do think, comes down to belief in ourselves, conviction in those around us, confidence in those around us as well, that if we're doing this as a team. But I think when people make bad choices, a lot of the time it's because they put their own agenda first. When you can learn to separate your impulsive natural desires, which are often driven by the moment, to one side, and look at what is best and what is right, not what is convenient or what is comfortable, then you start to make better choices and better decisions. So in the process of decision making, what I say is remove yourself from the equation and look at what is right and what is best not what you want or what is convenient, and that will help steer you in the right path.
Yeah. Also, I think, sometimes we shouldn't, we have to learn to forgive ourselves if we've made bad decisions in
Yeah,
the past, because
yeah,
sometimes those bad decisions can stop us from making other decisions.
100%. I had a great boss a number of years ago he was a great storyteller, and he would always teach the organization through stories of when he got it wrong. It was like his perpetual go-to place. And, because sometimes we come up with great ideas, or we'd think they were great. He said, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And you go, "Oh no, it's a terrible idea." He says, "And let me tell you why." He says, "Because I did that once, and this is how it blew up in my face." Right? Or you say, "Oh no, we thought this before, and it was terrible because this is what I did, and it was a disaster." We don't. But what he was really doing was through humor in teaching how he's gotten it wrong. One, be okay with getting things wrong.
Yes.
And learning, which is a great part of the process. Don't be that perfectionist that goes, it's got to be right or I perish. Yeah, it's be okay with making mistakes, but also that's where mastery comes from. It's as we've said before, you fail up. Yeah, and you end up winning as a result. So don't be afraid if it goes wrong. You get wiser coming out the other side. Forgive, like you said, forgive yourself, and keep making those decisions and moving forward.
Yeah. How about you, TJ, on this decision thing?
Just real
You
quick,
talk to
I
lots of
don't think
leaders every day, and obviously in leadership development, deciding and making decisions is key.
Well, Napoleon Hill says make decisions quickly, as you mentioned, but he says they change them slowly. And I think the reason he says change them slowly is because with decisions, you have to allow time for the harvest to take root.
Yeah.
Right. You can't cut the harvest off early and think that you're still going to get the corn. So you want to make those decisions. Now, I would say you got to know what's important to you too. You got to know your values, because that will be the governing principle in that's the window by which you make your decisions. And then I'll just finalize this by saying what Ben said, which is, I call it making a true decision. When you've done all the specialized knowledge, you've done all the imagination, you've done all the desire, you're clear about what it is that you want to achieve. At some point, you've got to make a true decision. And another root word of that is incision, which is to cut off all other possibilities to fall back on until the seeds that you've planted have taken root. And that takes a little bit of time.
Yeah. Now, the next point is persistence, which we did touch on in the very beginning. Do I stop 3 feet from goal? You don't quite know but persisting and keep at it. How important is it to keep at it? Of course, if you've been doing all the other points and you've got a strong desire, but sometimes you may make a decision to start a company and maybe the timing is right, but then suddenly something happens in the marketplace, a black swan event like COVID-19 lockdowns. Nobody expected that to happen. And the airline industry got completely battered because planes weren't flying, people weren't traveling. How do you know that you have to keep at it? Or how do you know it's time now to stop and go in a different direction? How important is persistence, the sustained effort necessary to induce faith, as Napoleon Hill puts it? TJ.
First of all, in life, there are obstacles. We're all going to hit obstacles, missteps, failures, so forth. The ones that get ahead are those that keep going. Now, it's because they figured out what they ultimately want. They have a specific desire. When to give up, there is a time and a place for that sometimes. But in his book, Jim Collins, How the Mighty Fall, after he wrote Good to Great, he, out of those 13 companies, 7 of them that he highlighted in that book as great companies, 7 of them went bankrupt because of changing circumstances and times and so forth. So his follow-up book was How the Mighty Fall. And guess what the principle was in that book? It was these companies forgot about their flywheel. Now, what was his definition of the flywheel? The thing that made them successful in the beginning. They started to venture out into other areas while letting go of their core focus of the business that got it off the ground in the first place. You cannot, part of persistence is, even if it requires you to change along the path, you never get rid of your purpose, your meaning. You never change that, because persistence is an honor, is holding strong despite the obstacles. The low achievers tend to give up. The high achievers tend to press through all the obstacles, and then you read their biographies and you realize these legendary achievers throughout the history of the world have all encountered thousands of failures and obstacles, but they didn't give up.
Yeah, which is really, really key. Ben, what's your take on the persistence?
Yeah, I'm going to quote Napoleon Hill here, because he just says it so well. He says, there is no substitute for persistence. It cannot be supplanted by any other quality. That's a powerful statement there. It cannot be supplanted. But listen to this. He says, those who have cultivated the habit of persistence seem to enjoy the insurance against failure. Now, he's not saying that they remove the opportunity to fail, or that they don't fail. He says it provides them insurance against it. He says no matter how many times they are defeated, they finally arrive toward the top of the ladder. I love that. No matter how many times you're defeated, you eventually get to the top if you persist.
That's right.
Yeah.
If you don't persist, I've always had this image in my mind of, success is an uphill battle, isn't it? You don't start at the top of the hill and glide effortlessly down to the bottom of success.
Yeah.
It's the other way around. You climb and you scramble and you reach to the top. And it is battle weary work, right?
Yeah.
But there are so many people that will get near the summit and go, this is too hard. And then they slide back down. And then eventually when they're back in the valley, they go, oh, okay, it sucks at the bottom. I don't like this. I'm going to have to climb. I'm going to try again. And they recommit, and they go back up and they start climbing up the mountain. They got all that struggle again. They get near the top. They say, oh, this is too hard. And they slide back down. And it's like the Sisyphean task that people turn their life into, of pushing the boulder up to the top, only to find at the end of the day, they're back at the bottom because they didn't persist. If you're just willing to just keep on going that little bit further, you can get to the top and get to enjoy all the fruits that so many people don't get to enjoy because they didn't complete the task.
Yeah, interestingly, Bear Grylls tells a story when he climbed Everest, and he was one of the youngest people to climb Everest. He said the last 5 to 10 feet of the climb was the most difficult, because he climbed without oxygen. And he said it was so difficult, but he was in that situation. He said to himself, I've come all this way and I'm just literally a few minutes away from touching the top of Everest. I can't not get there. But he said that last step was so difficult, but he just thought about all the work that had been put into getting there. And that's what gave him that oomph to get to the top, which he eventually did get to the top.
It's interesting you share that story. I was at a conference where there was a guy speaking who had climbed all of the 8,000 feet peaks in the world. Right, well, he was one of the world's most accomplished mountaineers, and he had on this one particular occasion he had climbed to the top of Everest, and he'd come back down, and he was being interviewed by a journalist who said, you've reached the top of a summit here that very few people in the world have ever been on. Right, this is a place that will give you views of the world that very few people have had the opportunity to appreciate. How long did you stay at the top and just take in that view? Right.
Yeah.
He said, about 30 minutes. Right. And he's like, the journalist was like, what? 30 minutes? Right. But this was a view that hardly anyone has been able to enjoy. That not many people have set foot where you have. He said, well, you're misunderstanding all of this. He said, I didn't climb Mount Everest for the view at the top.
Amen.
I climbed it for the feeling you get when you get bound down to the bottom. Right? That sense of accomplishment, of achievement, because I did it. That's why we climb. Right.
Well, the interesting thing about Mount Everest, more people died descending from the top than climbing to the top.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you get to the top, and I was listening to a talk by somebody that climbed Everest the other day, and he was saying about when I got to the top, they told us not to call our families to celebrate because we had to get down. And it's climbing down the mountain where most people lose their lives. So success is not so much getting to the top. It's also when you get to the bottom of the mountain that you get home safely. Because you sometimes, and this is quite an important analogy for us, because you achieve this success, and how many teams win, and then afterwards they can't duplicate that win. It's almost like, oh, they kind of relax a bit. And this is what's caught a lot of people once they get to the top of Mount Everest. They think, I got to the top of Mount Everest. Wait a minute, because now the difficult part starts, is climbing down. And so, winning once is easy. Winning continuously is more difficult. You got to stay humble.
Yeah.
True, so true. And Ben, I love that. The joy is in the journey. And that's hard for some to really understand, because they're such in the process of achieving and getting that end result, that reward at the end. So I find a lot of my time is helping people remember the joy in the journey is also important to recognize.
Yeah. Now we go on to the next one, which is a bit what we've been doing today, is the mastermind. Getting together and discussing points and having groups of people that you can sort of tap into and mastermind with. And one of the things that Napoleon Hill, this really nifty idea he had in his book, was about, he created this mastermind, choosing these people from history and imagining that he's sitting around the table with people like, Abraham Lincoln and, other people that didn't live in his time, and sort of sitting there and saying, okay, this is the problem that I have, and going around the table and imagining how these different people would contribute to the conversation. I thought that was a really, really interesting concept, but also masterminding is like we're doing today. We're masterminding this book written by Napoleon Hill and talking about the ideas in that. How important is tapping into masterminds in life and having these opportunities of being in these mastermind groups? TJ, you want to start?
Okay. One person has a set of intelligence. Another person has a set of intelligence. They communicate with each other, which Napoleon Hill says infinite intelligence. It creates a third intelligence. That is where the power is. So the bigger the group, the more cooperation, conversation, imagination, strategy, everything. And you create this infinite intelligence that you can start pulling ideas from and so forth. And I think that's what he created in Napoleon Hill's imagination around the table. But I think we do that in our own lives. Listen, I'm a better person, more effective being married for almost 25 years.
Same here.
Than had I been single for all these years. So
that's in effect, a marriage is a mastermind. Husband and wife together.
Yes. So I just think that's all I'm going to say is we are stronger as Ogmandino talked about it a lot. We're stronger as a team, as a group, than we are as an individual. That's all I'll say. It's just there's power in that.
Yeah. Ben, how about you?
Yeah, I agree. I see it like an amplifier of potential and opportunity and ideas. It's, because the coming together and the sharing and for me, when I participate in masterminds, I do come away wanting to be a better person. It motivates me. Yeah, I just come away going, man, I really like this quality of that person. And sometimes the ideas, that amplification, and like you said, TJ, that third intelligence that kind of comes in and participates as the culmination of ideas, doesn't always translate directly into what was being discussed in the moment. Yeah, I think
that's true. Agreed. Right.
Yeah, it kind of creates an environment of inspiration and confidence, where you can come away and you can be inspired with ideas that weren't necessarily discussed, but it created the environment for that inspiration to occur. And that I think is really important. It's an amplifier and a catalyst for greatness.
Yeah, I always find this sometimes with my wife. I want to do something in a certain way. She wants to do it in another way. And then we get together and we start talking about my way, her way. And then in the end, we find a third way, which is even better than mine and hers put together. So, it's amazing how a mastermind can sort of lead to greater ideas and greater solutions to problems, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And this kind of leads in, talking about marriage and that, leads into the next one, which is sex transmutation, which a lot of people read this and say, what's sex in a book about, what people maybe think is money, but it's not. But sex transmutation, I mean, sex, Napoleon Hill says here, he says, the word to transmute means to transform one element or form of energy into another. Hill argues that sex is our most primal and powerful drive. So strong is this desire that individuals often put their life and reputation on the line to indulge in it. Now, how many times have we seen through history people get caught up into situations and sex kind of overtakes them and overtakes their life and then has a detrimental effect on everything that they do. But if we take this energy and we focus it, it can really, really be powerful and help us to go to the next quantum level. Ben, what's your take on this concept of sex transmutation, as Napoleon Hill calls it?
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating subject to be involved, in a book like this, and an important one as well. I like how he says, sex energy is the creative energy of all genie. It is that. I think it does spark a great sense of creativity, and there is a huge sense of identity, I think, that comes with this when we learn to channel it, focus it, and direct it in a really meaningful, powerful way. I don't have a lot to say in this because it's a subject that I haven't jumped into.
Well, here's an interesting story. In the biography of Alexander Ferguson, the famous Manchester United football coach, one of the players tells a story. Says he joins Manchester United as a player at 19 years old, and obviously he's all fired up because he's playing for one of the best teams in the world. And one evening, Alexander Ferguson follows him home, and he calls him in the office the next day, and he says, "I followed you home last night, and I noticed that you live on your own now." He said, "Well, I joined Manchester United. I'm making millions, and so I thought I'd buy myself an apartment and that." So Alexander Ferguson turned around and he said to him, "Now, you're a young man. You're playing professional football. You're on TV all the time. Women are going to be queuing up outside the door for you. And this is going to be a major distraction for you. You've got your own place. You're driving a fast car. This is the best advice I'm going to give you now. Listen carefully." He said, "I would go back and live with your parents until you find a good young lady and get married." And this player said, "That's the best advice I was ever given for my career." And I sold my apartment and I went back to my parents until I met a nice lady and got married, had a family. And that way I was focused on my family, but there were no distractions and I could focus on my work. If this player had been gallivanting around with all these different women, it would have affected him on the football field, which would have affected his career, affected his financial situation, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought this is an interesting story and kind of explains the concept of sex transmutation that Napoleon Hill was talking about in his book, Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because sometimes I think maybe I take it for granted. I got married at the age of 25, and my wife and I both waited until we were married to express ourselves in that way. And I've been married now for 22 years. We've got 8 children together, and I guess perhaps the reason I take it for granted is it's been such a stabilizing influence in my life.
I think that's the key word, stabilizing.
Yeah. But because there's a saying, you've both heard this before. See that you bridle all your passions that you may be filled with love. Yeah. Right. When people learn to bridle their passions, their capacity to love intensifies. And it's magnified. It's strengthened. And I think when we learn to harness and manage that driving force that we all have, and control it healthily and well, I think it provides a stabilizing influence, remarkably in all these other areas of our lives where, like you said, so many people get to the top of the mountain, and it's interesting that it's this force, that can destabilize them and knock them off kilter, because all of a sudden they create a different persona of themselves because I'm the man now, right? And their sense of identity shifts, but it shifts in an unstable way, and then they make bad choices, and all of that success ends up for nothing because they lose what they value most.
You know, interesting in the book, the way he talks about it is, first of all, he says the average person didn't become successful and ultra wealthy until after the age of 40. Why? Because they were preoccupied with most of their focus going toward sexual expression. So his point in the book is, what if you can, not saying you shouldn't have sex. He's saying, what if you could take that same rich energy and direct it toward a goal? And I was thinking, when I was just reviewing that in preparation for this podcast, I was thinking, where in my life, I mean, there's many instances in my life where I've done that. And I think this capsulates it I never read a novel in my life, and I ended up writing the first, you can go to Wikipedia and check it out, but I wrote the first Swiss Family Robinson book in 105 years. It's a sequel to the original storyline. Anyway, I write in the author notes this: I filled my time. So this is at the end of the book. I'm just talking about how I wrote the book and so forth. I filled my time with writing the novel wherever and whenever possible. Here it is. There is something sweet, almost celestial, about burning the midnight oil while writing in the quiet space of my bungalow. I cannot, for the listeners to know, I cannot tell you how many times I've been working late at night when I could have had sex, right? But I was using that creative energy to write a new book or to burn that midnight oil. And it's so weird for me that some of my greatest ideas have come later in the night when I'm alone and I've been sitting and writing for a couple hours. All of a sudden, new ideas come that I act upon later and that opens doors later. I think it's just the principle of transmutation is just shifting an energy from one place. Which means you got to know what you want so that you can pour that energy into it to achieve it. And that's what I got out of that chapter right there.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Now, the next one is the subconscious mind. Now, Bob Proctor talks a lot about this as well. You know, we've got our conscious mind and this subconscious mind, which, you know, is always awake 24/7, which makes us, you know, the heartbeat, the lungs breathe, et cetera, et cetera. How important is the subconscious mind and what can we do to sort of influence the subconscious mind? I mean, one thing I like to do is play music in the background when I'm sitting here and thinking, and whether I'm writing or whatever, music kind of, they say, connects the brain. And there's all sorts of things that you can do to influence that subconscious mind, which in little children is obviously more easier to influence than as adults. But, you know, still that subconscious mind is really what governs us more than our conscious mind. So how does this play into our everyday life? Ben, over to you this time.
Yeah, I think a lot of this subconscious mind is often rooted in feeling and emotion. You know, we say that, you know, thought leads to action.
Yeah.
But I think that often, you know, or thought is father to the deed, and I think sometimes feelings are mother to the thought.
Yeah.
Because the neural pathways in our brain that go to the emotional centers are shorter than they are to the cognitive centers, which means we feel faster than we think. And as a consequence of that, you know, we can have all sorts of different emotions that we're experiencing that aren't verbalized subconsciously in our mind. We're just experiencing them and we feel them, and we aren't always giving them the attention that they need in order to take control of it, respond to it, and lead it out. But I think what we do is the fruit of what we think, feel, and believe, not just what we believe or what we think. What we do is the fruit of what we feel. And so, and I think at that subconscious level, we need to take a little bit of time. I think it was Chris that said at the beginning of the conversation, you know, take 30 minutes, you know, each day. You know, I think we've got to give ourselves time amongst all of the distractions, all of the busyness that's going on, to sit down and be present in the moment and to become mindful of what we're feeling, so that we can learn to just tap into, I think, our subconscious and take a little bit better control of it.
And that's why feelings play big into our emotions, and feelings play into the subconscious mind. TJ, your take?
We have the conscious mind and we have the subconscious mind. The conscious mind is the judge. It analyzes, it makes decisions. But then all of our life experiences are stored in the subconscious mind. There's been several scientists who have probed different parts of the brain only to have people conjure up images from when they were 2 years old and 1 year old and so forth, right? So we know everything is stored in the subconscious. What drives our lives is largely the subconscious mind. So the question is, if that's what's because it doesn't go to sleep, it takes in all data, it resolves concerns. I mean, I tell my audiences all the time, how many times you've been stressed about something only to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning with an answer to your question that resolved the question. That is the working of the subconscious mind. So how do we control the subconscious mind? And I would just suggest this as just a reminder. It's about what you feed your mind regularly. Whatever you bombard your thinking with regularly will one day, whether it's 13 days later, 21 days later, it will sink down to the subconscious mind, and that will begin to govern your behavior. Unfortunately, when something very drastic and tragic and intense happens to someone, that can almost drive something in a matter of a second because it's so emotionally charged to the subconscious mind, and then that will govern their lives. So it's about, for the normal person not going through anything extreme, it's about repetition, repetition, repetition. So until the time comes that your subconscious mind will start to work with that, even when you're sleeping. Stephen Covey always would tell the story. No, it was Joseph Murphy in his book, The Power of the Subconscious Mind, would say, on a ship, if the captain of the ship, which is the conscious mind, decides to turn the ship into the rocks, if the subconscious mind is the engine, will the subconscious mind follow the orders of the conscious mind or the captain and drive the ship into the rocks? And the answer is yes. It will take whatever information is dripped over time, and that will eventually have an effect on your subconscious mind. The key, I think, and it takes a lot of work and it takes time and it's deliberate, is you've got to really try to get the right thoughts into the subconscious mind, because that is what's going to govern your future. And that
TJ plays nicely into the last 2 points, and we'll close with this because I know Ben needs to go. The brain and our thoughts. If we're doing all the other points before and we're feeding our mind with the right information and the right, positive emotions, and that will help us. And I think the last point, which is the sixth sense, the door of the temple of wisdom, I think the sixth sense comes in more effectively if we're doing all the other 12. That gut feeling that you get, which some people call the sixth sense, is probably a result of the desire of the all the other points that we've discussed being played and being worked on a daily basis, and that creates that gut feeling, that sixth sense as to what to do next, and all those ideas that come to you at 1 o'clock in the morning, as you said, TJ, is a result of all these principles being applied in our lives. It's not just one, it's understanding these 13 principles. You think and grow rich, and I think that's the key word, is the growing. And we'll close with this. Leo Buscaglia, who wrote a lot of books on love, he was used to say, don't fall in love, because when you fall you get hurt. You want to grow in love. And he would say love is like you've got husband and wife, and they're like two gardeners in a garden, and they need to work at that garden every day and grow that garden. Well, it's the same here. You need to think and grow rich, and that growing takes work. It takes applying these 13 principles on a daily basis in order to make all these things come together, and you live your life purpose, because that's what it's all about. Ben, thank you very much for being on the show, and you, TJ, as well. And we'll thank Chris, and we'll have you on again for another mastermind soon. And thank you everybody for watching, for listening, wherever you are in the world. I wish you the best with your quantum action, and inviting you to infinity and beyond. Thank you.